Okay. I'm not going to play the music. I'm not doing the music. You can have the music at the end. Okay, hello. Welcome to take 2 of the Run Hot or Die podcast live stream. Due to some technical issues, we are having to redo the start of the podcast again, so apologies for that. However, I have with me, as ever, the wonderful Glory from the Steel Jaguars. Say hello, Glory.
Hello.
Hello. And, of course, our regular panellist, John Clavel from Wolf Spiders.
How you doing?
And finally, our guest panellist this week, we have Gauss Dragon from Chaos Legion.
This time without the bag of chips in my hand.
Okay, guys. Hopefully a much more structured podcast this week, we say. We're hopefully going to open up with news, talk a couple of discussion points on news and things that have happened this week. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to get the best out of your Catapult, what to build on your Catapult, how to really get the best out of that mech. And then our main discussion point for this week is going to be the Run Hot or Die League, and a big discussion, hopefully, about the competitive scene and some of the issues we are facing with trying to get the competitive scene up and running. So, guys, let's open up with news this week. And the first thing I want to talk about is the Cataphract hero mech. Obviously, that's been announced this week. It's an interesting decision for a hero mech, in my opinion, particularly with the very recent release of the Cataphract. What's your views on it, Glory?
Well, I find it an interesting mech. It's interesting that it has, ballistic points in the arms and the torso, so it's probably going to replace the 4X. I'm not going to buy it right off because I want to see, because, a lot of people are going to buy it right when it comes out. So I'd like to see it in matches, see how it does against me, take my Gauss cat against it, and see how it matches up before I decide to buy it.
Okay, JC, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, it looks really interesting because it looks like a 4X with bells and whistles. I'm worried that it will actually just supersede the 4X. So it'll be interesting to see the mech when it actually gets released, to see what have they done to try and make the 4X still seem attractive? Because obviously the limiting factor on the 4X is the engine limit. And it looks like, it's not really, I'm not 100% sure, but it looks like the hero mech will actually take a bigger engine. So if that's the case, then I think you're talking bye-bye 4X, hello hero mech. But yeah, I mean, really it's going to be a kind of wait-and-see situation. I think it could, with all those ballistic slots, I think it's going to be the most heavy ballistic mech in the game at this point in time. But would I take it over a Gauss pole? I have to wait and see. I'd be interested in buying it. I certainly, before I was thinking about purchasing the 4X to just kind of grind that up, but now I probably won't pick it up and I'll wait and see what this looks like. But it's good to see. I'm also glad to see that PGI is introducing new named sort of hero mechs, because obviously there isn't that many in Battletech. Really nice to see them adding more, and maybe even down the road we'll see some of these mechs get canonized.
I mean, one of the big discussion talking points that we had in the forum thread actually after the last podcast was that the Cataphract didn't seem to excel at any one thing. It wasn't a mech that you could optimize well, and there was a lot of back and forth. Actually, there's quite a few commentators standing up, particularly for the 2X as a build. I think with Gauss cannon and SRMs. Do you think that this is a mech that's going to supersede? I mean, you obviously touched on that, but is this going to give the Cataphract a chance in the competitive scene? Gauss Dragon, what do you think?
There's a few things to look at it. First of all, in terms of tournament loadouts, for those who don't know, in the tournament we typically drop by weight classes, either a few heavy, a few light, a few medium, a few assault, so you can only have a few of each in any given match drop. For what we've noticed, that specialization always does work better, so a jack of all trades traditionally doesn't do as well. That the exception might be the Atlas, but because there's no better alternative, So right now it's hard to tell really if a mech with like a few more scattered what are the hard points for different weapons will really work out versus one that's specialized. In terms of looking at the Cataphract specifically, and like mechs in general, I sort of categorize mechs in two major categories of geometry, either dildo style or billboard style. And I think the problem with the Cataphract is that shares the same problem with the Awesome in that it's a bit of a billboard. And when you're deciding, as a drop commander, whether or not you want to take a Catapult or a Cataphract or a Dragon, you A, look at the loadouts, and then B, maybe how easy they are to hit. And unless, there's a Cataphract that will be able to fit 3 Gauss without being completely gimped, from a tournament standpoint, I think the K2, the Catapult, is still going to be king. And again, with the Jenners we see with the laser builds and whatnot, specialization still does seem to work.
Yeah, and I think probably most competitive teams are very much of that opinion. The Cataphract is a broad mech. It is gimped with its engine size. It doesn't excel at any one thing particularly well, and that is a problem when you're looking at that competitive scene. I'm sure, and a lot of guys on that forum thread posted up about how well they've done on the Cataphract, and they've got high damage, at the end of match scoreboard and everything. But we all know that high damage doesn't necessarily equal to a good competitive build. You want kills, not high damage, and I think that's something that the Cataphract is suffering from. It's not a bad mech. It's fun to play. It is fun to play. It's a lovely looking mech. I personally love the look of it. I love the animation of it. But when you're looking at, running the EU team, I wouldn't include a Cataphract build for any competitive match at this stage. And it's interesting to see whether that new hero mech will be able to fill that void, maybe, particularly if it has 3 Gauss cannons on it, Gauss rifles.
I think the big thing with it really is it's kind of dependent on other factors in the game right now. I mean, certainly if they can address netcode issues, and we know again this is something that they're going to be looking at.
Don't mention netcode.
It's the point where they can refactor the firing netcode, and that has an effect on how weapons tracked in the arms. Then you could see Gauss rifles becoming much more viable as arm-mounted weapons. But right now, I think it's a limiting factor, and I think ultimately as well, when you look at the changes with the Gauss rifle that's coming, again, it's going to make taking anything but an XL extremely unattractive. So, if you're running a Gauss mechanism in your torso, then there's pretty much no point not to run an XL, because you're pretty much going to die from a torso hit if you're getting shot in the Gauss rifle anyway. So that has a big change on the game as well. So I think over time, maybe the Cataphract could, be more viable. But at the moment, certainly, if you're just looking at it from a Gauss perspective, I don't know.
I mean, that's probably, one of the other things. We've got a lot of changes coming up, and it is very difficult. We are, we're still in a beta phase. People argue the toss about whether it is technically a beta or not, but there's new features coming in, and that's obviously going to change the competitive scene a lot. And I think a lot of people forget that, things are going to change on a weekly basis, and we're going to have to keep looking at mechs, looking at different builds, and seeing how competitive they are on a week-by-week basis, just because there's new things coming in. You've touched on something else there that I wanted to bring up, the new features that we have coming into the game. Obviously, we've got ECM coming in, and we've got the Gauss rifle changes coming in. Let's briefly cover the Gauss rifle. Gauss rifle changes. Glory, do you think it's going to be a big deal? Do you think we're going to see less Catapults on the field?
I'm going to have to wait and see. I really think that they're still going to be really strong. I might be wrong. If they fall off like the moment LRMs hit you, then they might be dead. It feels like they really are trying to nerf the Catapult without nerfing the Gauss rifle, and I'm not sure it's really going to work, because right now Catapults can kind of run up and brawl, but they're really effective if they sit back too, and the really good shots can can be great from 700, 800 meters. So I think we'll still see lots of them, maybe fewer, but they won't be as aggressive.
Okay, what about you, JC? How are you feeling?
I think it's a really good approach, and I'm really pleased to see PGI went this way. Because obviously a lot of people have been complaining they wanted a nerf on the Gauss rifle, or particularly they wanted a nerf on the K2 mounting Gauss, because it is a really powerful mech. But I think just nerfing Gauss wasn't the way forward, and I think that doing it this way, making Gauss rifles more fragile, I mean, I guess they'll have to look at it and see how it goes with testing, but I think it just is much more interesting in terms of making the game, interesting to play, as opposed to, well, let's just nerf the Gauss rifle. I mean, effectively, pretty much anybody who's running a Gauss bolt is pretty much going to be running an XL, unless you're, really weird. I mean, all they're doing is just making the Gauss rifle more fragile. So once you've lost your torso armor, you're probably going to die from a Gauss rifle explosion. But you've got an XL anyway, so you're probably going to die anyway. So ultimately, it makes the Catapult a fractionally more fragile. But we'll have to see how much of a difference it makes. I mean, because sometimes you can take some hits. Because I would pad out my side torsos as much as possible to make sure that I have a lower chance of a critical happening on the engine. So it does have some ability. But considering how many critical slots the Gauss rifle takes, I mean, you're pretty much talking, as soon as you lose your side armor on your torso, you're going to die. But, if you can sit back and you're sniping and you've got a really good team that are, keeping them off you, they're really effective. So I think that they're just increasing the risk of taking one, but I think it's, it makes it more interesting. It makes them still really viable. I don't think it's going to, make them useless.
What about you, Gauss Dragon? Do you like the idea of increased fragility, or would you like to have seen a simpler solution, like increasing the recycle time?
I think it's an interesting approach. I mean, part of the reason the Catapult, the Catapult specifically, is so dominant is for lack of all else. I mean, I think this balance change was more of a stopgap than anything else. I remember Paul mentioning it's like they're really not trying to go too far into balance right now, only because it's changing so much. It's a fool's errand to try and change, balance 1 week and then add all new sorts of different features and weapons, only to change it again. It's like I said, no one weapon operates in a vacuum. And so changing one, changes it versus everything else in a relative sense. I know I'm sounding like a little bit hopelessly abstract here, but what I mean is that I do think it is, again, a stopgap, only because the balance is going to keep changing over and over. So I think this is just, to try and make other mechs a bit more viable in the meantime by making the Catapult a bit more fragile. And over the course of the game, as more mechs get added, more weapons come in and whatnot, I wouldn't be surprised if they bump up the internal health of the Gauss rifle back to where it used to be. But really, am I sad? No. I mean, is it dominant? Yes. Would it add variety? Quite possibly. And at the end of the day, I think, making sure each mech and each weapon is actually used is a good thing. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, obviously the other bit of news is the ECM is coming soon. JC, what are your thoughts on ECM? Is this going to be a game changer? Is this something you guys are looking? Give us some speculation.
Yeah, I mean, I think ECM is obviously a pretty big deal. I mean, the first kind of reaction I had to it was I was impressed by the kind of implementation they were looking to implement. I mean, if you look back to Mechwarrior 4, I mean, it was just reduces the range at which you could be detected. It was really simple. And it's really exciting to see, ECM having these different modes, and obviously you have this additional UI aspects. And I'm assuming that we'll see that in other modules or pieces of equipment down the road. But, I think ECM looks interesting. Certainly before, when they were talking about it, Brian was saying that it was a bit overpowered. So, I mean, from what I've looked at in terms of just glancing, it's certainly going to be a battlefield changer. I mean, we just tested it internally, and I think really we're waiting to just kind of get our hands on it and just try it out, see how it works. I think it was positive also that PGI decided to limit it to certain agencies. I think that's a really good move from my opinion, as opposed to just saying that every mech can mount it, because obviously a powerful piece of equipment. So it's interesting in that it forces you to bring some particular mechs that maybe wouldn't have picked before.
Okay, Gauss Dragon, what do you think? Are you going to be lining up these new mechs? Are we going to see more Ravens on your team as a result of this, or are you going to wait and see?
Well, once it actually comes out in a couple days, Chaos Legion will obviously be playing around with it and see how it works with our light pilots and how it works with the overall team. Because once we actually have the 8v8 coming with this ECM too, we'll actually be able to have proper drops against pre-made teams, so we can actually see how it works in a tournament play, not just trying to use it with pugs, which doesn't really get us a lot of useful information. Pugging is useless. But the thing I saw about this is that it was really interesting. Well, first off is that the ECM, I skimmed through the post and hardly understood it, so that's, I think, a good thing, since it's actually adds a lot of, complexity to the game. And second of all, they didn't allow it on the Jenner, since that's like the king light mech right now. For Draw Commander, it really makes it interesting for strategic level. It's a bit of a give and take. Being able to put on an ECM on a Jenner would make it a no-brainer, and the game would be have no more variety thanks to it. So now, if you're sitting here as a Draw Commander, you have to ask yourself, okay, do we forego the firepower of the Jenner for, the tactical, the tactical bonuses we get from the ECM, with the rest of our team? How's it going to work? And I think asking yourself these questions is the mark of a game that obviously is putting thought into how strategy plays out, and how complex it wants to be. And so, in terms of where having it on what mechs and what mech's done won't have it. Sorry, I'm thinking so many things at once. I can't get all my thoughts together before my mouth starts moving. Generally, I think it's a thrust in the right direction. Not being able to have it on the Jenner is a good idea, because it adds to more variety, and like I said with the Cataphract, more variety is better. Okay,
but I mean, it's a complex post. There's a couple of inconsistencies there. Is this really going to be something that's going to appeal to a lot of the lone wolves, a lot of the pug players, or is this going to, again, further divide that competitive community from the pug players? Is this going to be too complex for a lot of pug players? And I don't say that to sound demeaning or anything else, but, when you have a complex game system, it takes a while for people to learn it, And
I think I don't mean to cut you off, but I agree with you that it's going to be complex for most puggies, because a lot of them are still firing LRMs at 90 meters. So if we can't even really understand how ECM's going to work, it's going to take us a week or two of playing with it to really learn how to utilize it, and it's an extremely team-oriented thing. Is it really going to be useful to puggies at all?
And that's the thing. Are we going to see many of them actually fielding it? Who wants to be, when you're a pug player, who wants to be the ECM mech, really? Because people want largely... I know, selfish as it is, when I do pug games, very rarely am I playing that kind of support role. I want to play something that's going to kill shit, because that's why I play. So... Is that going to be a big issue for pug players? Or is it going to be balanced, because hopefully by then, or hopefully very soon, we'll have phase 2 of the matchmaking?
I've found a surprising number of puggies, people who are lone wolves, at least in Mechwarrior, like to be that guy who isn't the firepower dude who's helping the team out. Just as a passerby, I've noticed some people are hey, I'm scouting, I'm doing this. They're not in it for firepower, they actually want to help their team in other ways. So, and also, you just don't want to be caught too. An ECM will strategy you from any mech, so it lets you get, or at least, it lets you get in closer. So for a brawler, that probably has a lot of appeal, at least if I remember it correctly. But again, admittedly, I skimmed through it. I won't really know much about the ECM and how it works with the rest of the pug or tournament dynamic until we actually start playing with it.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. It's going to go well, I think, for the competitive scene. I think it's going to make games much more dynamic. There's going to be many more tactical choices to be made for the competitive side of life. I'm hoping it's not going to scare off too many of the Lone Wolf or Pug players. But it brings one of these interesting thoughts in, just something that crops up to my mind, about the need for a concise or effective tutorial system in MWO that we are kind of lacking, and again, we've discussed this before. It's something that does need to be done, but in the meantime, what is the best way for new players to really find out all the details that they should know? Because it's a lot of information for a lot of different mechs, so where should they be looking for this kind of stuff?
PGI needs to have a resource on their front page, just to make it very easy for, hey, new players could, click here, like something as big as like the download now button or something like that. Asking people to go to the forums, especially they're a newbie who don't really have an attachment to this game, is it might sound like pretty simple, but when there's so many games out there competing for someone's interest, stuff like that is actually pretty onerous. I know it sounds sad, but it's true, and people don't have that kind of patience. You want to make sure they get to learning the game as fast as possible. And getting their asses kicked by, people who are far more experienced than they are and far more organized isn't the best way to go about it. So I think if I just had to shoot from the hip, they should probably get someone to sit down and just write a how-to on the basics of jumping into a game and what they should look out for, and what generally this does, what this role does, or and then maybe have a wiki with all the different components of weapons, and then at the bottom just have a TLDR, for basically what you get out of this weapon or this item in this mech. And so for people who don't have the time, because again, this game has a very big arsenal, and there's going to be more and more mechs, so it's going to get harder and harder to understand. So I think we definitely need a resource that's very easy to quickly just learn the ins and outs. So when somebody jumps in, they at least have an idea of what they're taking in. Anytime I see someone with machine guns, I just sit there and cry a little, because it obviously means that. Yeah, it means, they don't really know anything about the game yet.
Well, Ohmwrecker did a really good series of stuff and information, readouts about technical information about mechs and weapons and stuff. I'm going to link it in the live chat, and we'll link it to the podcast after. But I would recommend this one highly for new players.
Can you link me the live chat in this Skype thingy? I have no idea where it is.
Yeah.
I remember seeing Ohmwrecker's graph. That's really good on him. I think this one might be... Is this updated, or is it a little bit out of date, though?
It could be out of date still, but he does keep them pretty up to date. I think that's a really good thing for new players to look at, though, and I wish it was a bit more visible, because it's, you have to dig in the forums to find this stuff, and newbies playing their first few games aren't going to want to look for that.
I mean, really, if someone else is putting the work in for PGI already, should PGI be promoting this stuff? Should this not be sticky at the top of the forum? I'm certainly thinking so.
I think, there are a lot of players are trying to contribute, to help people out and stuff. I mean, the other thing as well to remember is that a lot of players probably don't even look on the forums. So ultimately, you've got to have people coming into the game, and there has to be a new player experience whereby you have some kind of tutorial that's in the game. Not everybody is signed up on the forums. You can't rely on that. Aside from that, we've seen PGI trying to do some sort of tutorials, and the guys from No Guts, No Galaxy have been putting them together for them. I think they've done 2 now. I mean, obviously they're pretty basic. I think really they should do something which actually, a video which takes the player from getting in the mech, and looking at the torso movement, looking at the stuff on the HUD, something like that. I mean, so far they've done it. I don't know how sort of useful it is in terms of just technically getting into the mech, playing your first match type of thing. That would be useful. But I think they're looking down the road. They're looking at a new player experience, like a training kind of simulation or something like that.
I mean, Glory, I know you're a former World of Warcraft player. How much of that game did you actually get taught you in-game? How much of that was on blog sites, websites, things like that? Do you think it's acceptable for for a modern computer game to rely on the community basis to provide or fill in the blanks for the new players. You know, so much of the theory crafting for example, World of Warcraft classes came from things like elitist jerks. Do we need something like that for Mechwarrior, or should the onus be on PGI to provide this right from the start?
It should be on PGI to teach new players how to operate their mech, basically. I know we've mentioned Hawkins' tutorial before, but it's perfect. Hawkins' tutorial is perfect. You learn everything you need to know to go into a game and more or less know what you're doing. If you want to get into more complicated stuff, like with World of Warcraft, you had to go to elitist jerks and the mod sites and set all that up yourself and learn it yourself, or your raiding guild would teach it to you. And I think that should be the case here. If you want to get really good at this game, you should join a competitive team, and that's just how it ought to be. But PGI should at least, lend an easily accessible hand to new players so they can at least learn how to torso twist.
Okay, well, talking about teaching tips, tricks, and new stuff, and general basics, guys, how to get the best out of your catapult.
Before we do that, I just want to point out, like, on the UI, maybe they put this up here and I hadn't noticed, but on the game UI, we could just we just press a button and we'd be taken into the upgrade to founders, packs, or, basically the cash shop. They can do that with the cash shop. It stands to reason they would just do that for a tutorial. If they at least link it right in the UI, so when someone boots up to the game, they'll see like the splash page will be, oh hey, want to learn how to play this? You may want to watch this video first before you go into the game and get mops.
They did link that first tutorial. They did link it for a few days. It was up, but since then I haven't seen anything about it or any easily findable links subsequently.
Gotcha. Well, they should make something, a resource like that, permanent in there, though, or have like a window thing where they have like the message of the day, but it's like some go-to resources. They should at least keep them there.
I think, yeah. I mean, if the stuff is made, if there is stuff there, it should be a permanent link so that players can easily find it. What is the point in having it buried away somewhere?
Yeah.
And the website's not massively intuitive, if I'm honest. So you need to have those things pinned, posted at the top, have a link in the launcher, basically. That's certainly my opinion. Okay, so catapults, people.
Woot!
Talk to me about catapults. Tell me your tips, tricks. How do you be awesome as a catapult pilot? Glory, let's start with you. Firstly, what are your three... If you're trying to build up to elite status with the XP on the catapult, what are the three chassis that you use, or would you recommend to a new player?
This is easy for me. C1, K2, and A1. C1 would be a laser boat, or LRMs if you really want to, but I would lasers and jump jets. K2 is a Gauss Catapult, and the A1 is obviously a street cat.
JC, some dissent there from the back row. Tell us your tale. Come on, tell us how you do it.
Well, I've already mastered my catapults, but I did the C1, K2, and the A1. And I did use a street boat. But certainly in terms of I actually, when I was grinding my K2 up to a master, I actually just used my C1 build on my K2 because obviously it's lasers, you're not spending any money on ammunition and shit. So it's the best way to just make as much money as you can as quickly as possible. But yeah, definitely my C1 is a laser bow. My K2 is obviously a Gauss Catapult, and I sold my A1, and then because they nerfed streaks, and then I was QQing because they made it again.
That's so cheap, JC. Gauss, what do you recommend? Do you think we should go for the laser boats on the C1, or do you think for newer players, LRMs are the way to go ahead?
Well, for the three catapult variants, I'd recommend to be the K2, the K2, and the K2. But seriously, obviously, you want to go running to the K2 first. That thing just spits out damage. It's obviously by far the most effective build, and at any range, really. And then I started grinding at my founders and using the LRMs. I wanted to shoot myself when I was grinding that up. I did it because I had to, not because I wanted to. And those games are not fun because LRMs right now are crap. And then actually with the A variant, the A1, instead of taking streaks like everybody else did, because frankly I'm not a huge fan of streaks, don't take any skill. I sound like a dick saying that, but I really don't appreciate streaks too much. I actually loaded up with a whole bunch of SRM6s instead. And so I get right up close to any given mech and just unload an SRM Bukake on them. And you do an incredible amount of damage. So it's actually kind of fun because the thing was just a walking missile shotgun. So, I mean, there wasn't a lot of, like, intelligence going into it, but you just aim in the general direction of a mech and press fire. And, like, you'd see them just light up. You'd see, like, a nice rainbow of colors on their damage display. And that grind went pretty fast. But when grinding any mech, the first thing you want to do is actually get with a team. Better you have a team that knows what it's doing. It'll make the grind. You'll win a lot more. You'll rage a lot less. So tip number one for grinding through any mech is just get a team.
I mean, when you're doing the grind, do you guys believe that you're better just to go for the grind, or is that a useful time to be learning how to use different weapon systems? I mean, Laurie mentioned they're using the laser boat, so you can practice your marksmanship principles instead of taking LRMs, which are just lock and fire. Should you be taking that time to practice, or should you just rush it, grind it out, so that you can focus on, let's face it, the K2?
Oh, grind, definitely grind. And the reason that I chose the lasers on the C1, no ammo cost. Plus, it's a really good variant. The large laser, medium laser, large pulse laser, medium laser variant is, it's not a Gauss-Catapult, but it's really effective and it's a lot of fun, and you don't have to pay for ammo.
JC, would you mess about with the variants? Would you mess about with the customization options a lot while you're trying to grind it out? Just to try different things out, or are you very much of the grind and get it done persuasion?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, when I first actually when the game went open beta, and then obviously they reset everything. I had my founders C1. And I think I didn't have the money to, like, pimp it how it needed to be. So, and I didn't want to, because they nerfed the cost of, like, the selling of mechs. Obviously, people before were just buying an Atlas K, getting the 300 XL, getting 500 million C-Bells. Thank you very much, I'm ready to go. But then they nerfed that, and, you got the XL engine. I mean, the mech costs, what? 12 million C-Bills or 555 MC, which was again an increase over pre-open beta.
Yeah.
And the sell cost of the mech is like 2 million. So it was a real hard, tough bargain. I didn't go for it in the end. I didn't want to throw away all that MC. So I think I stuck like 4 medium lasers on my C1 for a while and just grit my teeth just to get some money. And then I did pick up my K2 with MC, and then I literally just that was the first mech I fitted, and I actually put my laser boat build onto the K2, grinded that through, and then I stuck that build onto the C1 and built the Gauss-Catapult. But I built the Gauss-Catapult after I had already grounded enough XP to master the K2.
Gauss Dragon, I mean, give us some tips and tricks for the Catapult. What would you say are the big things to remember when you're piloting a Catapult?
Which one? It makes a big difference as to the variant.
I would say primarily the K2, because that's going to be the big one that most people are going to be looking to master.
Figure out what your ping is and what your lead time is. Shooting at close range is a bit more nuanced. It wouldn't necessarily be because this is I'm not really going into detail how to explain this, but basically shooting at close range can at times be harder than shooting at long range, because at long range the lead distance you need for your actual delay is kind of hidden in the fact that you're leading forward to the travel time of the Gauss rifles. You don't quite notice it as much. But when you're actually up again in close range, almost equal parts, you have to take into, well, it actually inverses. You have to take into consideration how the delay works and then how the actual weapon speed works. And explaining this will take too long, but just basically be conscious of that and how the weapons fire and where they actually land on a mech once you fire. Like how the delay is, where they ended up on the mech you're firing at, how far you're leading, and how fast it's moving, and all those factors that go into it, like the wind speed, yada yada. I'm just kidding on that one, but basically pay very very close attention to what your ping is at all times, and pay very very close attention to what shot is landing where on what mech, how fast it was going, and what angle it was coming at you at. And if you remember these things and like dig up in your memory, okay, this mech I landed this shot at this ping, eventually it'll come together and it'll start becoming more natural because you'll just see your mind will automatically calculate in your head what you need to do in order to lead the shot. But it takes observation. You can't just sit there and like crack off shots like half-assed until you actually like start getting it down pat, like how much you need to lead.
Glory, you're probably one of the lead snipers for SJR with the Catapult. What do you say are the key things that you really need to be remembering with the K2?
Well, I'd like to, I guess, go into some common mistakes I see other pilots do with a Catapult. Like, probably the most common one is that they never turn away. They stay facing you all the time, and you don't want to do that in a Catapult, especially if you're in a shoot-off against another Catapult. Like, you need to spread the damage, you need to fire and look away. I mean, you'll see if you hit or not, because the reticle will turn red whether you're facing the mech or not. But if you're in a shootout, don't keep your center torso face at that mech. People also don't guard their heads very well. Like there's a value in just move, even torso twisting just a little bit, shaking a little bit, because you can avoid headshots that way. I also see people, like GD was mentioning, with close range with the Catapult. One of the weirdest things about Gauss is that, or at least with the Catapult, is that if you're turning your legs while you try to fire, the Gauss is going to fly off in a wild, crazy direction. So it works better if you turn as far as you're planning to turn and then turn your torso back. At least just don't be turning your legs while you're firing the Gauss, because for whatever reason right now, it'll fly off wherever the hell it wants to.
Yeah, one really big piss off when piloting the K2 against other K2s is when you're in a circle strafe fight. For whatever reason, I haven't quite figured this out, is that you'll shoot at a mech at whatever level along the torso and I end up hitting the legs. And it may be the fact their convergence, the net code, both acting in some unholy union together to screw you over and piss you off. But generally, when you're in a circle strafe fight at close range, you're against another catapult or something else, aim a little bit higher, because otherwise you'll be hitting legs. Again, why this is, I don't know. I want to bang my head on the desk when it does happen, but just keep that in mind too. Now, maybe I just can't aim, I don't know.
What about hill popping? It's an old Mechwarrior 4 tactic. You do see a lot of newer players doing it. Do you hill pop, or do you think the convergence creates too much of a problem with that?
Oh,
I absolutely hill pop. It's different than Mech 4. It's no Nova Cat, but
JT, any opinion on hill popping?
Yeah, I think hill humping is still pretty effective. I mean, especially when you've got everybody, and I see this more in pub games, where like half the team has got LRMs, and like, oh, tra-la-la-la, we're gonna fucking LRM you, and then you just like hide behind a rock and then come out and shoot them with a Gauss rifle in the face. So, yeah, I think it's got value, but yeah, it's not like Mechwarrior 4, but yeah, there is value to it.
Okay, cool. Any other tips and tricks for the Catapult? Anything that you really think people should be paying attention, particularly with the K2?
Not that I'm going to tell everybody.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
we
you.
can hear you.
Yeah.
I think one thing to remember is, and I think this is just applies to everything really, is like just get out there and practice. You're going to come across a situation whereby there's the hitbox problems, and also you've got funky net code. So it's going to take a while to kind of learn. You'll see, oh, am I making mistakes, or is this an issue with the game? But if you just keep playing it, you'll start to work out how how it feels, and you'll get a feel for it, and you'll just get better at it. In terms of actually just like the builds that people take, I mean, even in our unit, there's a couple of different builds that people like to take depending on their play style. I mean, I've got my particular build. I know other people have, very similar but slightly different. I mean, it's just kind of like how you want to play it, really, as well. Like, there's certainly a good way to build a Catapult and a bad way to build a Catapult, but within the realm of a good Catapult build, there are small areas to change things up, and it's going to just be how you want to play or how your team wants you to bring that Catapult.
I mean, is there? You're talking about the builds, and I'm not asking any of you guys to give away team secrets or anything like that, but are there any key hints that you would suggest when people are trying to think about how to build their Catapult?
Runs want to backtrack because GD wanted to say something about hill hopping.
Sorry.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I was getting horribly out of sync for a bit. My connection was taking a nosedive.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's all good. The hill humping thing. I was one of those guys back in Mech 4 who was the antichrist with that kind of stuff. I would load up an Overcat with 70R large lasers and pop over in third-person view and just absolutely ruin the game. I loved it. With the K2, with Endo Steel and Ferrofibrous, but mostly Endo Steel, we can now, instead of having the XL220 in the Catapult or something a little heavier if you don't like lasers, now we can start fitting on things like 280s and even 300s. So of course that makes it A, faster, and B, able to accelerate and decelerate a lot faster. Now is hill humping the begin all end all tactic used to be? No, because mechs generally are slower, which is a good thing. So you still want to pop snipe if it's at long range, but it's like in the past in Mech 4, it was the attacker, the one coming over the hill and shooting, who had the great advantage. But now with the mech coming up shooting and going back down, he's still exposed for a meaningful amount of time. So you're still going to be exposed to return fire. So it's a more a matter of how competent your opponent is.
Yeah, I think you're right, and there's a lot of players with some hangovers still from Mech 4 and trying to adjust to that. But again, as JC said, it comes with time, it comes with practice. If you like that build, you guys have been saying, grind out the other variants, focus on practicing marksmanship principles with your K2, So as we were saying with the builds, what are your key tips when you're trying to make a build? Obviously, I'm not asking you for a complete technical rundown or a readout, but what are the common mistakes when people are building a Catapult?
Not being as good as me.
I think one thing to remember is try to make sure that you're taking up every single critical slot space in your side torso as possible, because you're decreasing the chance of getting an XL engine hit. So if you can, don't leave a slot free.
That's a good point. Good point. Any else?
People often don't take enough ammo, or they fire way too much for the amount of ammo they take. Like, I keep hearing about people who take 5 tons of Gauss ammo, and I'm like, what? How can you even do that? I take a lot more than that.
I mean, again, it's another good point. It's a very ammo-dependent mech. You have no other sort of alternate weapons, really. I mean, you can make adjustments.
Well, you do now. We didn't before, but with double heat sinks, we do now.
You can make those adjustments if you want to, but again, I would say most Catapults that I see out in the field don't carry the extra weapons. They keep it strictly to the 2 Gausses.
I've seen it half. I'd say it comes down to preference. I mean, we'll see more in tournament plays. I'm not going to say too much about my preferences or my wingmates. It depends on the situation and your play style. So I think one major variation prefers one playstyle, the other major variation prefers another playstyle. And how you can dictate the pace of the match and how your tactics are and how you get a tournament match to go your way and play to your strengths, will only, augment what you took in a battle. So that's what I'll say about that.
Cool.
I think my suggestion would be is to find a build that is somewhat modular. that allows you to, depending on what you're going to be doing or how you're, say, I mean, if you're playing in a team anyway, if your drop commander wants something specific, then if you've got a build which has some room for some modification, where you can throw something on, say you want a couple of extra tons of Gauss ammo to bring more to the field, or do you want to put something else on there? I think that gives you flexibility. I would also say stick some fucking AMS on it.
Just to point out, making sure your DC knows exactly what your build is and make sure you're on the same page is really important. I wasn't there for it, but the Chaos versus ELP match, Tease had a Hunchback that had a standard engine. He's being outturned horrifically. And so we only found this out after the fact. There was much rage afterwards. But yeah, make sure that was like an object lesson in making sure people are very clear about what they're taking on their mechs, making sure the DC knows it, because that way they can factor it into their plan. You know, if you take a mech with some slight changes that change the dynamic of the mech or how vulnerable it is, and the DC didn't know this, he put you in a situation that what he assumed was safe, and then realized, oh shit, no. Like, hey, I'm going to take an XL engine you didn't tell him, and he throws you in against these mechs, and your psi gets scored out, and he assumed you were, had more tanking power than you actually did. You know, these things are important.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing to bring up, that the majority of competitive teams have a standard variant list that if you're asked to take something, you build exactly what is on that list, so the DC always knows.
And in fact, that was something else I was going to come on to. You know, as competitive players, a lot of you competitive team leaders, how much leeway do you give your pilots to build your mechs? You know, when guys are looking to come away from being lone wolves, away from being pug players, they've ground up their catapult, they want to be a Gauss pilot. How much leeway do you give them to work to their build, their special snowflake build that they love and cherish? And how much do you say, right, no, this is the build, this is the way it's going to go ahead? And how can those newer players prepare themselves for joining a competitive team like that?
Well, in SJR, we have kind of a split of opinion on that. I'm of the opinion that it should be cookie cutter. They should all be the exact fucking same. And we test these things to, min-max them out to the nines. And don't tell me you think that this funny little weird thing that you do is better for some stupid freaking reason. Okay, there is a split of opinion, but I feel pretty strongly about that. But some people don't, and well.
What about wolf spiders?
Come on, JC.
We have been really quite lax, actually, just because of the state of the game. But we do have like a set list of stuff, like cookie cutter builds that we have and that we can use. But we also just tell people to try stuff out. We try and test loads of stuff, and obviously, weapon stats are changing a lot. There's a lot of changes coming as well that Paul's announced. But yeah, I mean, you've got to have cookie cutter builds as well that are like min-maxed, and they'll evolve over time. But we don't want to stifle people trying new stuff. But at the same time, it's important to have go-to builds that are approved and everyone knows are effective.
Yeah. How can that player prepare themselves for joining a team, though? Again, a lot of the players are going to have all sorts of various mech customizations that they have made, and it is a big change coming from being a lone player or a pugger to joining a competitive team. What's your advice for that? Because it can be a sharp contract when you're suddenly being told, hey, this is the mech you're taking.
That I guess it depends on each unit. For us, we're pretty like horizontally organized, but meritocratic organization. So if you're a good mech pilot and you show us something that works, we'll take you more seriously. We tend to go for cookie cutters too. Again, T's taking that standard engine in the finals game was an object lesson. You learn best by having a lot of QQ over it. After that, we were making sure we were always telling each other to make sure that we have like the cookie cutter builds, but people weren't quite listening or just weren't grinding up to get the mech and just dropped in a match without telling us. And so communication is really important. But when it comes to newbies, we'll listen to them, but oftentimes will come up with ideas that we proceed to shit all over because of a lot of things they hadn't considered. And so I forgot we were having a conversation, myself, Christoph, who was our DC, and one other person, this third person, was offering some suggestions, and then we proceeded to shit all on over it because he hadn't actually considered all these other factors. And I think it was involving ammo in a K2 or something like that, or another mech. So generally, like you get credit for actually showing something that works against us, but we'll be able to do more of that come phase 2. We can actually prove it to each other by a lot of dick waving and theory crafting in the mix.
I mean, this is another thing that we do see time and time again. People post up their mech builds in the forums, and again, they post up this normally the end of match tables, and you see 800 damage done, you know, a kill, 2 kills, something like that, you know, but they're overawed with the amount of damage done, and therefore they perceive to classify that mech as a good mech.
Mm-hmm.
What's your thinking? What's your thinking on that? You know, how can you get people out of that mindset?
That's actually really interesting. I was having that with a teammate yesterday. We were both taking light mechs, and he's like, "Hey, look, I did more damage than GD. I did more damage with GD." And I'm like, "Oh, that's great." I'm dicking around, but there's something you have to understand here. When we had some of our best guys dropping in a 4-man the other night and just like steamrolling teams, our scores were incredibly low, but we didn't die. And that's indicative of the fact that we're not missing much and shooting exactly the places we want to. We're not getting points from arms. We're not getting points from legs.
Exactly.
We're getting points from shooting exactly where we're supposed to. So you see someone with a lot of points, maybe they're an assault mech, B, maybe they have like 6 SRMs on their A1 or something else. But generally, like if you see like a pre-make a win there and shit all over your team and have low scores, it means they're doing something right.
I absolutely agree with you.
And I think that's a common misconception that damage equals skill, you know. And I even suffer from this sometimes. I will come out the match and I will have done a low damage score. And I'm like, oh my god, did I just like kill steal everything? But I haven't. It's because my shots have miraculously landed on target somehow. Whilst I'm coping with lag and whatever other issues that I'm coping with. You know, so it's something I think it's something that a lot of people who aren't playing on a competitive team need to bear in mind. You know, and it's a mindset that people need to adjust to when they're going on a competitive team. A lot of the times the DC won't just call your target, they'll call where to fire on that target as well. And it's an important thing to remember when you're looking to join a competitive team.
In Chaos Legion, we even have go-to spots on mechs that we try and aim for first. You know, see, oh hey, this is so mech. You generally want to try and aim for this first, if nothing else is damaged.
Yeah, we do that too.
Yeah, I mean it is. It's and as much as you can ease that process in by having these, like you say, these set up things where you've automatically got the target points on various mechs. Sorry, small child trying to wave a transformer in my face. Where you have, you know, right, this mech, Atlas K, you need to hit this point on this target because most likely they're going to have this, you know.
Yep.
Then it's going to make
exactly that... what you're talking about.
Exactly. You know, you're going to make that transition. And again, it goes back to that thing we were saying earlier about if you want to get better at this game, join a competitive team, because the more advanced tactics are going to be in the forums of your team. You know,
well, there's also the other thing is that pub matches mean shit. They don't mean anything. Like, you do 800 damage in a pub match and you're proud of whatever Frankenmech you just made because you did that because you can kind of pilot better than everybody else who really doesn't know what the hell they're doing. That doesn't make it a good mech. You need to take it in a controlled setting against other good players. Otherwise, you don't know if it's any good or not. We have a guy who is, you know, reasonably decent with a commando. Tremor. He loves his commando and he does all right with his commando, but it's a commando. And I don't care how well you do in a commando. It's still a commando, and you're not taking it in a league drop.
No, absolutely, and I think. Again, that's another issue, and we kind of moved on to to our next topic here, which is competitive play, and the competitive issues that we're seeing in game. But again, one of those other things that a lot of new players aren't quite so clear on is drop decks. JC, talk to us about drop decks a little bit.
Drop decks.
Drop decks for those newer players, those not familiar with the competitive scene. Explain to us a little bit about drop decks.
So a drop deck is basically where obviously you've got a match coming up, your drop commander or whatever, you're going over, first of all, the players that you have available to drop. You're looking at the tonnages or whatever restrictions there are on the drop. And then you're coming up with a mech setup for that drop. Probably the type of mechs, the weapons that they're going to be having, and who's going to be piloting them. And then basically that's what a drop deck is.
Gauss Dragon, tell us why it's important.
Drop decks?
Yeah.
Well, currently when we're trying to sync drop, making sure that everybody has the right weight class is very important. Otherwise, you find out after 3 mulligans, oops, sorry guys, one of our guys, we had 3 light mechs and we only had 1 medium. Oops, sorry about that. Sorry for wasting about half an hour of your life. That's really important. Drop decks, I guess they're just like the collective version of your cookie cutter mechs. Drop deck is just basically, hold on, I'm trying to read this. You guys, I guess the drop deck is just basically how many of each weight class you have, you're going up against the opposing team. So typically you'll hear people say on comms 2-2-2-2. That means 2 assaults, 2 heavies, 2 mediums, 2 lights. So you'll hear 3-1-1-2 if my math is right. Nope, that's not a number. Anyway, you get what I mean. So, or 3-1-2-2, something like that. If you hear those numbers and 4 numbers in succession, then that's basically a drop deck.
Okay, and Glory, how do you fit that into the competitive game? How do you match up what mechs you're taking? Excuse me, small child. Quiet, go away. How do you match that up into the competitive gaming? When you're trying to figure out, right, our drop deck for this match, the matchmaking is 2-2-2-2. How do you, as a drop commander, think about how to make those mechs mesh together, the mechs that you're going to take? Do you have pre-planned drop decks for each one that you're going to take, or do you look at your pilot's individual abilities, or how do you do it?
Oh, it's a combination of all those things. We do have pilots who are mainly, one thing or the other, or a few things, and when we have them on, we know what we'll put them in. There are really only a few synergistic drop decks for each of the potential drop decks in the current league. There's only a few ways to fit the best builds together. Like you're among the top teams, if you have a 2-2-2-2, you're probably going to see the same chassis, if not the exact same variants from I'd say the top 5 teams will do the exact same thing. So right now, there's not a whole lot of variety. So there's that to consider.
I think we've discovered the min-max pretty quickly, but again, there's not that many mechs to choose from, so it's not exactly a very difficult discovery process. For Chaos, our drop decking, if it's a really good team, like SJR, you guys, or maybe the Goons A Squad or CSR, we'll definitely take them seriously and try and throw at them, our really serious players and our serious faces and our serious mechs, and we'll try and figure out, okay, what's their strategy, how they like to play, and then figure out how we want to counter that. But it all depends. It depends mostly on your opponent and your drop deck. So every drop deck's different. You'll have different people with different strengths and weaknesses. You obviously want whoever's your best people in their best mechs. So of course you'll have the same people. You'll have the same people running the light mechs. You'll have the same people running the medium mechs. You'll have the same people running the heavies. You'll have the same people running the assaults. And you look at your opponent and you figure out, okay, how do we know they like to play? How do we like to play? How are we going to load out our mechs the way they play and the way we play? And then how are we going to try and dictate the map, dictate the progression of the match based on our strengths? How do we want to make sure that we win? How are we going to make it so that we shit on them as much as possible and not the other way around?
Now, and this comes into another interesting point, actually. One of the things we had on the last podcast forum was the differences between pug play and competitive play, and there was a little bit of an accusation there that competitive play at the minute really just boiled down to having a large group of mechs stick together and shoot one target. How would you refute those arguments?
That's a load of crap.
They don't know what they're talking about. People, we take a lot of crap from the pubbies and the community at large for like, oh, the only reason you're any good is you have an 8-man. Well, if you have seen even the videos that some of our teams, SJR, CSR, I think Wolf Spiders has some videos up, and obviously the ELP versus Chaos match from the first tournament.
Oh god. Yeah, actually, I'm going to go to a case study right after you're done on that very first match.
But yeah, there are things that you can go watch, and you can even hear on ours at least. We leave our drop comms on there, so you can hear what the drop commander's saying and everything. And you'll hear that it's not just focus fire and sticking in a lump. Like, we go to specific places on the maps for a reason, because we know that we can control them and things like that. Like, what did one person say on the thread? That it obviously wasn't a competitive drop because there were no advanced tactics like flanking or anything. Like,
yeah, flanking was mentioned.
But
if you don't have any observational skills, a lot of the nuances getting it lost on you. If you haven't actually played these drops and played against competitive teams and actually have DCs who know what they're doing, you're just not going to notice it. And even when you're watching another team play, watching their videos, you're trying to figure out what's going on in their head and what they're doing. You can kind of get a gist of it, but you don't know entirely until you're actually on their comms. That's a good thing that SJR, you guys put up, your actual comms too, so people can get an idea of like what you're doing. In terms of pre-made play, team tournament play instead of pugs, there's a massive difference. And mindset, having a player with a lot of observational capacity is really, really important. There's a lot of information to take in, and generally it's even harder when you're piloting a small mech because you're running a lot faster. In Atlas, you can be slow, go lumber along, and like be able to take in information. But it's a bit disorienting when you're in those fast mechs, especially trying not to collide with other people and trying to maintain your accuracy. At first, it was a little bit difficult when we played our very first serious business drop against Black Wolves. It was kind of ad hoc. It was a very, very difficult learning experience. We still won, but none of us were satisfied. There's a lot of things we did wrong, and we couldn't quite put our finger on it because when these drops happen, there's a crap load of nuance, and we have trouble wrapping our heads around and explaining it. Where was I going with this? Okay, ELP versus Chaos. I know I'm going to be calling out one of my own teammates here, but I'll give you an example of what not to do. If you look at the very first match and you look at it from the ELP's perspective, there was a breakdown in communication. I think either that match Johnson left halfway through, or he wasn't even there at the beginning. And he was the lead generator. We in like a 2-2-2-2, or in any drop deck, we'll have a lead person in, the mechs. Generally, like, we'll have a certain division between DC saying, we generally do this, and then it's up to the wing leader to decide how they want to approach it on the execution level as opposed to tactical or strategic. So it just takes experience being able to do that effectively. I can't go into too much detail because each situation's different. But you look at Smoke and Joe come right up the valley, right up through the alleyway on Forest Colony. I'm not sure if you guys remember that. Went all the way up through a gauntlet of mechs and came all the way back down. That's a pug move. That's not something like, a pre-made team is supposed to do. And when I saw that, I absolutely freaked my shit out. Because it's like that's something a disciplined team should ever do. But I mean, it's little moves like that that can get you screwed over. We learned this too. Like, we were doing a whole bunch of scrims versus CSR. And, we weren't bringing our best people, but, a lot of people were learning stuff, and, they didn't quite have know how to strafe a mech properly and not collide on each other, because most of the matches we lost against them were ones where we had the most collisions and knockdowns, because a good team will always capitalize on a knockdown mech and stuff like that. Doing your tackles right, making sure you capitalize on opportunities, going over the hill once and running straight at a K2, and then getting cored out, which SJR did to myself both games when we were fighting them. Good on you guys. Myself and Christoph got taken out early on, because I was making dumb mistakes. I was coming at high firepower mech straight on and making it easy for them to core me. So, there's a lot of little nuance in the way you move. You really have to understand how you're moving, not just like your opponents, what your strategy is. You really have to know your positioning. You really have to know your placement. You have to know your opponents. It's really being self-aware, because one little mistake, especially when knockdowns come back, will completely, that will be the TSN turning point. If your mech gets knocked down, and losing a small guy, especially when you're using it to harass like medium mechs and heavier mechs, losing any size mech early on can be a huge handicap. And so not having positional awareness and fucking it up for your team could be the win or lose. Because like against two very good teams, these games are won and fought on margins, and one little fuck up could mean the difference. So there's a huge difference, an absolute massive difference.
So come on then, all very good points. Why don't you flank? You know, this is one of the questions that was asked specifically. Why not flank? These are supposedly the advanced tactics of Mechwarrior Online. So why don't competitive teams flank?
It's not that we don't. I mean, in our very first tourney match against Blazing Aces, we used kind of a pincher movement and went around the caldera of in Cossack Valley, like 4 mechs on one side, 4 mechs on the other side, and because their entire team moved as a lump and focused on the 4 of us that had the 2 Catapults in it, the other half of our team was able to scoot behind them and get a quick base cap. Like, they killed 4 of us, but we had that base down in no time. And I guess you can. That's what people mean when they say flanking. I don't really believe that's what flanking means in military terminology. But that's really what they mean, and that's what players mean when they say it. And I mean, I guess we do that, but that doesn't work. It doesn't work against good teams. It wouldn't work if we did that to Chaos. It wouldn't work if we did that to Snow Raven. And it's not that we don't and wouldn't. If you have an opportunity, sure, it might give you an easy win.
Here's the thing you have to remember. Sorry.
It's just that tactics don't have to come from a military playbook. We don't have all the space in the world. This is a video game, you know.
In Mech 4, you had a ridgeline, you had a bunch of high DPS mechs, and you had less armor values. You'd be dumb to be caught out in the open. You know, you basically have a whole bunch of people line up and basically start shooting. It was different in Brawler League and MWO, but essentially the tactics were completely different. We had a lot of leeway. Most of it was just dependent on your team's execution, each player making sure they could actually aim properly. The kind of thinking you need for good positioning in MWO was completely absent in MWO4. And honestly, in MWO is a lot more challenging in that respect. You need to really be conscious of where you are. And if you're talking about flanking in terms of like trying to get like, you know, splitting your team and getting on one side of the opposing force and half your team on the other side, you have to remember this is a slower game, so being caught out of position could really harm you. And if you decide to flank, sure, oh hey, but then all of a sudden the 8-man group that you're opposing decides to lopside half your team. They say, oh hey, they pincered us, but we're just going to completely crap all over the left side instead of the right. You've made a huge error. And those are things, it depends on the team, it depends on the map. There's a lot of little different execution changes, like depending on. I'm having trouble explaining this because it comes down, it's so situational, but making a right turn or a left turn in terms of city and where you're going makes a difference because mechs take longer to get there. Mechs aren't nearly as fast as Mech 4, so positioning is a lot more important. And so when you're kind of trying to figure out like where you want to be, the more important thing is actually positioning, setting yourself up where you want to be, not exactly like, oh hey, we're going to go flank them here or there. It's like you want to actually make sure you're set up and in a position that benefits you. So when the clusterfuck starts, you're prepared for it. And then you're able to put yourself in a good position so that your team, you can rely on execution, good pilots making sure they kill the other guy first, among many, many, many other things.
And of course, as you mentioned there, positioning is half the battle within these competitive matches.
Is a big portion of it.
The lights. How important is it to have good scout mechs out for you guys?
I've never met a team that's had better light pilots than us. Just going to put that out there. And basically, you know what? And here's the problem. A lot of, even with really good teams, we've noticed is that you want to make sure you have good people in every single mech. There's a lot of great K2 pilots out there. There's a lot of great like Atlas pilots out there. But what I've noticed is that there's a deficit in really good light pilots. And being able to use the mech effectively to its full potential it's situational, but there's a lot of thinking that goes into using a light effectively. And again, you make one mistake, you get knocked down, at least back when the knockdown was in it, and you could screw it up for your team. So there's a lot of importance on not ruining it. I would get into more detail, but I don't want to give up too much of our playbook. I could go on for a long time, but yeah, basically you want to make sure you actually have people who are go-to anything pilots and make sure they're really prepared in those mechs and make sure they've warmed up before a match too. Make sure they're comfortable in it and are actually, because each mech has different sensitivity. As faster mechs would be all over the place, so make sure they're just warmed up and got like their reflexes down.
Well, I would say lights are like one of, if not the very most important parts of the game right now. If you've got crappy light pilots, you're gonna have a bad time. I mean, they dictate the game, practically.
Yep. And they can make a big difference on mechs that are higher up, especially with like the general with the laser loadout that everybody's using. You know, actually, I'm going to stop there. But anyway.
JT, you're very quiet. Talk to us about the challenges of being a drop commander. You know, we're moving on slightly with the topic, drop commanding, and particularly in the competitive scene.
Drop commanding is an extremely exhilarating and fun job, but at the same time, it can be really taxing. It can be stressful. If you get like one loss, you know, it can really hurt your confidence. You know, I mean, I used to be one of our main drop commanders back in Mechwarrior 4, and like, just taking that loss, it's just so horrible. Like, I would just beat myself up, wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Like, if you win, like, you just fucking, it's the best. It's just the best feeling. You know, if you're playing a really good team and you drop commanded, you know, like piloting and winning is good, but if you're the drop commander and you take your whole team to a victory, it's just fucking the best feeling. But if you lose, it's really horrible. But it's, you know, it's one of the most demanding positions in any team. I think my advice to any team out there that was, you know, trying to set up and stuff is make sure you do not just have one drop commander. If you can have more than one, it's a boon for you, because it's a tough job. Drop commanders will get burned out, and you know, you can have other drop commanders that can rotate in and share that load. It's, you know, it's such a big positive. So I mean, I know for WSB, you know, we put in place like a really what I think is a really good drop commander program from day one, and we put a lot of emphasis on that we wanted to, you know, to encourage people to just experience it, even if they didn't want to do it long term, because they would better understand what the drop commanders wants them to do. But yeah, just have a go. I mean, obviously it takes confidence to do it, and you know, and that confidence will come in time, but just give it a stab. Like, I mean, even if you've just got really basic, just, you know, telling people where to go, telling people who to shoot, calling targets. I mean, it's just basic stuff, and from there you can build on top of that. But you know, good drop commanders will be, you know, looking at what's going on, and they'll be assessing what the other team's doing, and that they will try and react, move their team to correspond what the other team's doing. They will look for the tiniest mistake that the Op4 might make, and if they can exploit it, they will. And I remember back in Mechwarrior 4, you know, you'd have drops that would last, you know, 40 minutes, maybe 60 minutes, and it's just, you know, you're just probing you're looking for that slip up. You want to force them to make that little slip up, and then just bam, you know, that can be what wins you the match. But yeah, it's really fun when you've got two really good teams, and you've got two really good drop commanders, and they're just trying to play each other.
Yeah, there's two major things I noticed in DCs. First of all, you want to make sure your DC is a very observant, intelligent person. You can't pull it off with someone who just doesn't have those skills. And we're lucky that Christoph really fits the bill. Really intelligent guy, really observant, really understands the game, and really grasps those nuances of positioning. A lot of people don't, and like some players do, some players don't. And you can't have someone who just like who doesn't get it. You really can't. And second of all, almost always a DC will end up being in the Atlas, because it's hard to command in a faster mech when you're moving around and, like, you know, using brain power to just pilot your mech and, like, you know, move left, right, center, whatever. You usually have to have your DC, so that kind of like really funnels it down and pigeonholes it. So you have to make sure you have someone intelligent who's also very observant and also likes to pilot assaults. Those are pretty much those are the three main criteria for a good DC. You know, a DC may not be as good as a Shaw as some others, though we're lucky our DC is everything. So, woo. But, you know, finding someone who's really observant and really intelligent is worth its weight in gold. You didn't really need that in Mech 4 because it was all just left down to execution level, each person. And then wave combat wasn't nearly as prevalent or as just respawn. So you could just keep going, spilling in, cluster fucking, whatever. But, like, a lot of the little details of movement are really important. So you need a really intelligent person who understands all that. You can't do it with a dumb DC. You just can't.
I completely agree with you. This game, like Mechwarrior 4, came down to pilot skill more than anything. This game comes down to the chess match between the drop commanders.
Yep.
And this, bringing it back to the new player and the new player experience then. With, obviously, new players joining the team, and Glory, I'm going to point this to you because I know this is a particular thing for you. How important is it for those new players to listen to the comms of the DC? I know it sounds like a bone question because obviously to us it does sound...
It's obviously extremely important. You know, before we let anybody in SJR, once they pass their interview, we invite them to a few practices. And if they suck at those practices, if they're not doing what they're asked to, if they're not, proactive and being like, what do you guys want me to take? Where should I be? What do you want me to do? They're not for us, It's so important to be attentive and want to be a part of that team and be willing to be told where to be and what to do, because that's the DC's job and our job, when we're not... I'm not really a DC, so it's our job to do what we're told and be where we need to be, because even if it's not a great call, you're better off everyone doing something that's not a great call than everyone doing what they think they should be doing and going in separate directions.
Yeah, and it also comes down to having, again, like the way we're structured, we also have wing leads. Because Mech4, it was just all execution, but with this, it's far more tiered between strategic, tactical, and execution. There's more balance, and having someone who grasps it at all levels is really important. And when we drop 2-2-2-2 in a drop deck, someone will be the designated wing lead for that pair. And it's very important that you have a wing lead who gets positioning right and make sure you're in a situation that doesn't, really cost your wing, your pair of mechs, the game. And so, again, case in point, Smoke and Joe going right up that alley in ELP. That would never, ever in a million fucking years having me as the general lead. It's just not something I would do. And it's, again, things like that, just positioning. You have to be very conscious of where you are and your timing in terms of when you're going to engage. Because it's up to the wing leads to determine, who to shoot at too. Because the DC he's got to shoot at people too. So again, you have to make sure you have really competent wing leads.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the new player coming into a competitive team, what we should be looking for a competitive team.
Who listens to the wing leads. Generally the people who do best with us are the ones who really go along and understand and listen to their wing leads and the DC, are really able to take in all that information and just shoot well. It's hard to get someone who fills all those different points, but the people who listen and follow their wing and DCs better and actually go with the game plan, generally fare better.
Yeah, so obviously, we've talked about the importance of the ring leads, the drop commanders, and new people joining the competitive teams. And I think, importantly, what we've addressed here is the common perception of competitive teams amongst those pug players, those lone wolves that don't really understand it. Now, one of the things I would ask you guys is, what are the challenges we are facing for the competitive game in MWO at the minute? What are the issues that trying to get this competitive scene going to a higher level? What are the challenges we're facing here?
Well, even though it affects both teams equally, netcode. I mean,
yeah, I would agree there, yeah.
I'll let you guys elaborate on it since, I've already ranted about it enough before this.
Well, I think we've gone into netcode in a few podcasts now. We probably don't need to harangue on it too much. I mean, other challenges to the competitive community. What the league currently has 40 teams, I think, signed up for it when we can start again. But based on the actual player base of Mechwarrior Online, that's still really small. We need a lot more teams interested in doing this, but we're probably not going to get that until PGI offers us something that competitive players from other games like World of Tanks and things like that are going to want to come here for. Because right now we're forcing it. We want this so bad that we're finding ways to make it happen. They haven't provided a way to do it. And once they provide a way to do it, we're going to have so many more people interested in the competitive scene of this game.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the key things at the minute is, yes, it needs to be supported. It needs to be viewed at as a positive direction for MWO. But again, we've discussed this previously in podcasts as well. Perhaps later on down the line, there are other issues that need to be addressed first. Do you agree, or do you think that this is something that PGI should be looking at straight off the bat?
Well, I guess what I was getting to, before we started this thing, was just PGI is developing for two major audiences, right? Those who want to be able to have the competitive players, obviously, a predisposition towards wanting gameplay, like fluid gameplay, better netcode, stuff like that. Whereas the more immersion-minded players want like good graphics and be able to, see the prettiness of the game and whatnot, And PGI is like trying to overhaul the engine to make it look better, with DX11 and whatnot, and the new CryEngine. And at the same time, they're also trying to put in Phase 1, Phase 2. So I think they're taking it in two major streams at the same time. And obviously, one camp wants more of their goodies than the other camp wants, their goodies and whatnot. So, I don't envy them being in that position. Obviously, there are a lot of raw, like just basic fundamental gameplay points that need work. And again, the netcode's one of them. But I mean, this game is built on new players. Competitive players don't just pop up, on their own like some exotic little particle, just don't pop into existence. We all started somewhere. And I think Phase 1, as much as we all hated it, we knew it was necessary. Stuff like that, to stop like all the new people from getting steamrolled. Because they're going to get frustrated. They're not going to, enjoy the game and become like, competitive players. They're not going to evolve.
Okay, well guys, I think we've pretty much addressed all the topics that we wanted to cover this evening. I think we've had a pretty good discussion out of it. Glory, can you just finish us up with a little bit on the Run Hot or Die League at the minute and where we're at?
Yeah, sorry. Right now we're just gonna have to... That's my dog drinking in the background.
Don't worry, I have small children drinking in the background. You're fine.
Right now, since we're gonna get 8-Mans back on Tuesday, so we've been told, we'll see if it actually happens. But we're gonna have to probably take a week or so and have the competitive teams try to sync drop against each other, see if we can get it working as well as it was working, because it was syncing really well. We were able to get 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5 matches sync dropped, which is why we were able to do the league at all. So hopefully it'll work as well as or better to sync drop, and hopefully after a week or so of figuring out how it's going to work, we can get the league started again.
On paper, I'm fairly confident we'll be able to sync drop, since you can't, if you're an 8 pre-made, you have to go up against another 8 pre-made. And if you're coordinating with someone on Dragon's TeamSpeak server, there's going to be one waiting there right for you. So, at least on paper, in theory, it should be alright. Unless there's some unforeseen, event. Although with these patches the way they've been, I'm not ruling that out. But...
Okay, fantastic.
There's also... Sorry, Runs. There's also another thing that we're looking at, is that now that sync dropping's not going to necessarily be class-based, it's not going to be weight class matching anymore. We might look at changing the drop decks to tonnage base. So just any teams out there listening to this, keep that in mind. We are looking at changing it to tonnage instead of class. So if you have any opinions about that, feel free to post it on the RHOD boards.
Okay, excellent. Right, well guys, we're going to wrap it up there. I just want to do one thing before we wrap it up, and that is just to plug SJR Dale a little bit with his live stream and the tutorial videos he has been working on for a little while. Glory, have you got Dale's Twitch address? Because I can't remember it off the top, and I can't touch anything because it ruins the stream.
It's twitch.tv/Dale Martell. That's DALEMARTELL.
Okay, the reason why I'm highlighting that, we talked a lot about the new player and the new player experience. Dale is actually a very, very good pilot with the Steel Jaguars, and importantly, he takes the time with his viewers to explain what he's doing, why he's taking certain mechs, why he's taking certain builds, and really allows a lot of back and forth discussion. And a lot of people who viewed it have come back very positively and said it's helped them. So hopefully, if you are a new player, you are trying to get into the game, take it up to the next level, I would highly recommend watching Dale's live stream and the tutorial videos that he throws out there, and hopefully it will help improve your gameplay. As always, I've been Runs. This has been the Run Hot or Die podcast. Thank you, Glory. Yay!
Oh, there you go.
Yay!
Thank you, JC, as always, spending your Sunday evening with me. What else would you rather be doing on a Sunday evening, of course?
Nothing.
Absolutely.
Nothing else is better.
Can I just make one last plug?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I've seen Dale's live stream. He's one of those examples of people I was talking about earlier who gets it. You know, you'll learn a lot by watching his live stream. It's probably, of all the ones I've seen in Mechwarrior Online, it's probably the best one to go to if you want you take competing seriously. Also, Chaos has a new website, killsecured.com. Go and register on the forum, say hi. It's not fully done yet, but, you know, just throwing that out there. Shameless plug.
Nothing wrong with that. And Gauss, thank you very much for joining us. Quite short notice as well on this Sunday afternoon for you. So thank you very much, mate. You've been a very engaging guest.
I love talking shop and waving my dick, so.
And what a fabulous member it is as well. So, from me and the rest of the Run Hot or Die crew, thanks very much, and we'll see you guys again. Bye!
Bye.
Here. Are we still live? Well, he can edit it. I think that's it. How long until you put stuff on YouTube?
Usually, it can be up by the next day, but this one I'm gonna have to highlight out the watch at the beginning before we upload it to YouTube.
Oh, yeah. Alright then, I'll be off, but this is an awesome experience actually. Thanks a lot for inviting me.
Yeah, well, we'd probably love to have you back on if you want to keep doing it. If it didn't scare you away, taking like, what, 4 or 5 hours? 3 hours?
Having been the guy coordinating the sync dropping, I know all about taking time, and like even back in MWL, way back in the day, you know, like you'd have, oh hey, we're dropping at 8 o'clock, you know, 9:15, we're ready to go for the first match. I know exactly